So my thesis, I based it on a fairy tale about a girl who is forced to marry her dad, and to escape this fate, she asks for 5 dresses, and she's given 4 silk ones and 1 dress made out of wood. And she puts them all on, and she covers herself in the wood dress, and she throws herself into the river, intending to kill herself. But instead, she floats away. She floats away. She's found by a prince who treats her very badly because she wears this wood dress. But it's the thing that saves her. And in the end, she takes the wood dress off, and then marries the prince. But the end of the story is not very good. So my thesis started. When I started thesis, I had no idea. I wanted to make things. I didn't know if I wanted to make dresses. I started actually doing urban design, and somehow switched into this after maybe M2, M3. And I started doing this because I think it's quite personal, but like the reason I'm in architecture school is, well, that I went to architecture school was this kind of fascination with making things since I was a little kid, watching my mother make all my clothes. And it's kind of the scale that I understand material with. And so I started studying a lot of these fashion designers. This is Issey Miyake, Alexander McQueen, and Yohji Yamamoto. And I picked these designers not because, they're extremely fashionable, but more because, this is Balenciaga, because they're all masters of making things, especially someone like Issey Miyake, who is more interested in making processes rather than the artifact. So he'll design a new way of making a fabric, or of a new way of stitching a garment together, and that informs what the garment looks like. And so this is the wood dress that I made with one of the rubber and silk dresses underneath. Some of the sketches. This is Katrina, my model, and just me understanding all her dimensions. And then the prototypes that I was doing throughout the process. So this took me probably a year to do all these paper prototypes. This is one of the silk dresses, supposedly, but it's actually made out of industrial felt with some silk used in the thread. It's based on samurai armor. And so just the kind of stitching was based on the type of stitching that they use in armor and also in the funeral garments for Chinese emperors. Some of the CAD work and labeling to understand all my bits and pieces, and prototyping. And then I've got some pictures of like the material experimentation, trying to figure out what materials I could make this thing with. The dress that supports the wood dress had to be strong enough to carry it, and so I was experimenting with different types of rubber, silicone, and leather, and then stitching it together. I was also looking at aircraft plywood, but I, in the end, didn't want to use this. I think it became a bit expensive, which is a problem sometimes. And then more prototyping. This was the jig that I made to make the wood dress, and so I kind of made this at the machine shop on main campus, and it was the thing that I kind of clamped all the wood to. So the wood I would cut and soak it in my bathtub and then clamp it until it dried in the shape that I wanted. And so this is me playing with the jig, trying to figure out how to use it. And I'm going to say that I didn't have any sketches of this beforehand. I just kind of started making paper prototypes. I don't draw very well, and it's very hard for me to express kind of what I want to do with a flat drawing. And these are the parts and kind of the detailing that I was doing. So trying to figure out a way to harness the wood dress onto the girl, and then putting it onto the dummy, and then onto Katrina. So and these are kind of some studies that I was looking at before, like the idea of, I was looking at kimonos and like things like Oscar Schlemmer, where they both, like the issues of like space around a personal body or kind of bodily extension were really important to me, and bodily deformation. These are costumes by Issey Miyake for a ballet. Yeah, and so this is Katrina dancing, trying to dance in the wood dress above here, and then being a lot more free in the smaller dresses. So that was my thesis. Took me about 2 years to finish, and afterwards I had a few exhibitions, and didn't know what to do afterwards, because I think that's the point of the symposium, like, what do you do afterwards? So I ended up going to a lot of interviews after my thesis, and the reaction that I got at the different firms I was interviewing was very mixed. There was definitely some firms that didn't understand how I graduated architecture school with this, and then there were some firms that loved it. So I ended up working at one firm that loved it. So I ended up working at Congat's, which is a small practice in Toronto. I think my boss liked my work because of the interest in material research, and it was something that he did a lot in his own practice. So the first project I was assigned to was this student center in North Bay, where we tried to invert the idea of creating a log cabin. And so it's a very modern log cabin with ceramic frit on the glass with this patterning, and trying to make the best use of 8 stencils to create the most variation in the facade. And then also the interiors were impregnated with, it was a really raw wood that was impregnated with something called PEG, which kind of preserved the wood and prevented it from cracking. And I found it really rewarding working here because you could still do that kind of material exploration. This is the Health Sciences Center that I worked on for the University of Toronto while I was there. A lot of facade experiments with this project. And this was a district energy center for the Pan Am site that unfortunately was put on hold. So after, like, this was about 3 years of work. Like, it's not all the projects in this office, but I got my license there, and my supervisor for my thesis was Philip Beasley, and he was looking for someone to join his office because at that time his practice was exploding with a lot more installations. And so I really missed kind of the installation art and the sculpture, so I decided to go work for him for a while. So I think most people here are familiar with Philip's work. And yeah, it's probably one of the most experimental offices I've ever seen. And so this is the state of his studio. And I mean, every day was very, very different, right? So you'd spend your time prototyping the tiniest things, or trying to make machines that make bubbles, or trying to figure out a way to make like that feather at the end stay in motion for a given amount of time. Trying to figure out the motors that would do that type of work. Working with, there's an engineer in the office who would like work with him to design a lot of the housings for his chips. So this is the first project that I was lead on at Philip's office. It's for the Digital and Electronic Art Festival in Rotterdam. And the idea with this one was that the sculpture was actually connected to the audience using these emotive headsets. And I think some of the students here have used them, but they're headsets that kind of read your your brain waves, right? Like there's like 16 points of contact on your head. And so the idea is that the headsets can detect whether you're excited or you're calm. And it can relay that information and tell the sculpture that, okay, the audience is pretty excited, shake a lot or something like that. Or, the lights and the sound that come with the sculpture kind of amplify when the audience is a bit more ramped up. And then when they're calm or meditative, then the sculpture calms down. It didn't work that well, but it was a really interesting experiment. This one is, so at the time, Philip was doing 2 really large permanent installations, and this was one of them. It's for Simon's department store in Edmonton. So it's at West Edmonton Mall. And this is the size of the production team that has to work on those. So I think one of the presenters was talking about the idea of exploiting interns. So I don't want to say that happens here. But I think a lot of this work is not possible without interns, unfortunately. So, you can see, so the studio team is the team that gets paid, and then everyone else is the team that, are volunteers. So, and that's kind of how it works there. So this is most of the studio team. In Philip, and this is what happens on the installs, right? So we would break up. Usually, Martin, who's the guy in green there, he'll do the rigging work with his team, and then I would usually do the groundwork with my team. And so these are like a lot of the little systems that we designed. These are, the idea for this sculpture it's called Aurora, and so it's based on the Northern Lights, and we were doing cascading chains of light. And so I think I worked on these chains for over a year, drawing the same thing, and trying to figure out, sourcing the lights, sourcing the silicone that goes in it, sourcing the glass. A lot of the glass is custom made, and we'd get it made in India or China and give them 3D models, and then the factories would do prototypes and send them back to us. And then producing these documents to kind of explain to our interns and volunteers who don't necessarily have the same background as us or the training, but we produce these documents to help them understand what they're making. So these are this is the cloud layer. So sorry, these are the drawings that would document kind of the glass chains, and these are the cloud layers, the inert things. And then this is the finished piece. So a lot of the grotesque and the really difficult parts of Philip's work are stripped from this project because it's in a department store. These are some experiments that the office worked on for textile development. So Philip's working a lot with Iris van Herpen, who's a fashion designer in the Netherlands, developing dresses for Paris Fashion Week. And so a lot of these things were used eventually in her last collection. And yeah, these are just more projects that we've worked on in that office. So you can kind of see my interest in the sculpture, and my background is actually in physiology before architecture, so I'm really, I have a background in science, and so I do like this kind of technical work, and the kind of the protocell chemistry I also find very interesting. And it's not something I've been able to find at other offices. This is a project in China. This is the last project I worked on in the office was for a museum in Korea. So, and this is kind of the installation team. This is Vogue Korea taking photos. Yeah. So I was there for about 3 years. And so while I was there, I think when I started there, I had already co-founded with some friends, a small little firm called Guild, where we do like public art projects. So these are me and my buddies. And so the idea with Guild, we just started applying like my interest in sculpture and public art. Like I want to do that stuff eventually on my own, and so we just started applying to a lot of open calls and RFPs, not expecting that we would get anything, but we just thought we would try. And so I think one of like the second application we sent in, we got accepted to do this project for Nuit Blanche, and the city actually gave us $10,000 to make a sculpture, and so we're really excited about that. And so we made this thing called Through the Gorilla Glass. My friends and I are really interested in kinetic work, so it's a sculpture that is a giant sine wave, and so we put it on the top of City Hall, and then I think we brought it to Cambridge for a while, and then we took it to Burning Man, which was interesting. Yeah, so I don't know, and it was like really, it was kind of, I think it's important to note that two of my partners used to work at Cicada, right? So they spent their whole time doing digital renderings and animations and not being able to build anything. And I'm obsessed with building stuff. And so they really wanted the opportunity to kind of re-engage with material work again. And so that's why we started doing these really large-scale kinetic projects. So this project led to another commission the next year for 2012 Nuit Blanche, which didn't turn out as well. But I'm showing it anyways because I think it's important to just keep on doing work, even though like sometimes it doesn't work out as well, or you might not be as happy with the results. But it was still pretty successful in, the piece was like a pretty good social aggregator, which is something else that we're really interested in, creating things or small spaces that people want to be around or be under or be in. And so from there, we started going for permanent proposals, and we got this one commission from the city of Markham last year. And so it's a permanent piece for a new community center and library that they're working on. This one it's kind of like an Alice in Wonderland playground for them. It's like all these spinning kinetic tops. And so a lot of this work is all done outside of my full-time job, right? So I have to point that out. Like Burning Man was basically my vacation from Philip's office for 2 weeks, and then the next year I took a vacation to produce these design documents. So like this is basically when I do this work. And so we issued construction drawings last week, and they're beginning the prototyping phase. There's a fabricator in Cambridge that's doing the work for us here. And I think eventually it'll be installed in 2016. This is a project we're working on for the city of Kitchener. It's for a community center, and it's based on like textile patterns from the area. And then this is for a street art project for the community of Weston, which is in Toronto, a very poor area in Toronto. And this was, can't remember where this is. It's for the city of Toronto. It's another kinetic sculpture. And this one we came in second place, so we didn't get this one. And I'm just starting now. Okay, so all this work was done while I'm working at Philip's, and it was getting to be a bit too much. Working at Philip's office is very time-consuming. So I've recently left, and I work at U of T now, and I'm starting to work on my own projects again. I'm returning back to kind of the dresses, and this is one that I've just started where I'm trying to make, it's based on another fairy tale called The Wild Swans, where there's a bunch of princes that have been turned into birds by this curse, and they go between birds and boys. And so I'm trying to make these sweaters that basically turn between feathers and plant material. So, yeah. And I think I'm going to just end off with the video because I think most of the work that I do with Guild is quite kinetic. So I kind of want to show what they actually look like when they move.